I mean, muskrats might make their own. We might not need to do anything.
Well, that's what they're on right now, is a muskrat. Was one of the few remaining muskrat houses over the winter. They found it. We'll see if they have success. It's been a long time, like 3-4 weeks. I think she's been on the nest. Hello, Mayor. Oh, he's muted.
John, in terms of role, I have everyone and I've got 7 o'clock. The one thing I'd want to point out for everyone is that Erin Summers is participating in the meeting. She is not currently a member of PRFC.
Okay. We have Jim and Mark. Where are they?
They both entered the room.
Oh, okay, I'm not seeing him on there. Oh, there's Jim.
Well, John.
There we go. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and begin the meeting? We'll start. First item agenda is approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. I would entertain a motion to accept the submission of those minutes as presented.
So moved.
Okay, thank you. Second?
Second.
All right. Any changes, corrections, additions, deletions? All right. Hearing none. All those in favor of the submitted minutes, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. Before we go on, I guess I want to just say thank you to Erin for your work on this committee and for being here and doing it and doing a great job and putting up with all of us. So thank you very much again. And I guess we have a welcome to a new member.
Actually,
Matthew?
John, the new member resigned before accepting the position, so we have
Oh,
a
that's
vacancy right now.
Okay. All right, so we are where we are. So, all right, so new business. The first item of business is election of a chairperson. I open the floor for nominations.
I'll nominate John Schaefer as chair.
Thank you. Duly accepted nomination. Any other nominations? All right, hearing none, I guess I've got the job by acclamation. Or however, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I enjoy the job a lot, actually. Do we need to
John,
vote?
just a question. We may need to take a vote just to have that officially in the minutes.
Okay. So all those in favor of John Schaefer as chair, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. We have a motion there. We also need to elect a vice chairperson. The current vice chairperson is Nick, and I would certainly nominate Nick.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any other nominations? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of Nick as vice chair, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you, Nick. You get it. It's a tough job, but you get it again. We also need to appoint a member to Conservancy Lands. David, you've been doing that. Is that something you still wish to keep doing?
That'd be fine.
All right, do we need a motion or is that just a,
I think just
Nomination.
I'll make that motion.
okay, Sue, and there's a second to that motion?
I'll second that. Well,
All right, we have a second. So all in favor of David being on Conservancy Lands Committee, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you. We now run into this little sticky wicket thing of the discussion of future meeting formats. I know the city and others are starting to look back to, do we keep Zooming? Do we meet in person? Or I'm not quite sure what this blended thing is. Maybe Mark, you can, or Matt, you can speak to that.
I'm not sure that, well, I understand the concept is that you'd have a hybrid format that at the council level, I know is going to require a majority of the council to be in person, but that there's some technology upgrades to be made in the council chambers that could allow for Zoom to continue to be an option. And I think at the council level, there's a lot of value in that. I'm not sure. I guess I don't know enough about it to know how it would work at our level. From my perspective,
100 people in the audience. So.
What I will say is, and what I've noticed, we've had more community member participation via Zoom than we've had in person as a PRFC committee. From my perspective, I have no concerns moving back to in person. And it's really a committee discussion in terms of what you guys want to do.
All right, so open the floor, thoughts.
Okay, as somebody whose profession has completely gone to Zoom, okay, I've spent the last year plus, year and a quarter of school year teaching on Zoom. Quite frankly, I'm tired of it. I am ready to be done with Zoom. I have said to many people, if I, next school year, if I have another meeting on Zoom, I might just quit because it's exhausting and there's a lot of nuance that we lose, right? I feel like it's harder to have a really true, organic and authentic conversation on Zoom. You lose body language, you lose various social and visual cues of kind of getting an idea of who wants to talk, who wants to, how people are kind of feeling as you're talking. It's hard to see. I can only see myself plus 4 other people right now on the screen, so I can't see the entire committee while we're sitting here with the shared screen. And I just feel that it's as everything else is opening up, those of us who feel comfortable enough going back in person should be given that opportunity to do so.
Okay, Sue, I saw you nodding your head. Any comments?
Well, some of my comments agree with Nick. One thing that I like about Zoom is I like the idea that many people can join the meeting and participate in the meeting, or at least hear what we're doing. I think that's a very positive outcome of the Zoom, is that more people are participating, or at least listening. But I personally am tired of Zoom. I think it would be nice if there's a big snowstorm and cold weather and I don't have to get out. But I like meeting person to person.
Yeah.
I like being able to share ideas with somebody I'm looking at person to person, seeing their facial expressions and hearing what they say with gestures, etc.
Okay, good. David, any comments?
I guess I'll just chime in that Nick and Sue, I think, are right on point. I also think that at least for me, I sometimes hesitate to say things while on Zoom that I might say otherwise, just because it's a little more, it's awkward.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me not feel as free to discuss the things the way I might otherwise. I love the idea that people can join in remotely and certainly listen. But in terms of the committee itself, I think it would be best if we were all together in person.
Yeah. Jim, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sick of looking at my own face, so I'd like to be in person. I know I can blank myself out, but in person, like Dave, I think you were suggesting, you get the visual cues a little. It's easier to sort things out as a group rather than on Zoom.
Well, and the problem is you're the only one that can blank yourself out. I can't do it. I tried, All right.
The only time Zoom would have been good is the meeting we had the evening of the flood.
Oh yeah.
We were sitting in chambers and the city was floating away. But
I remember being there. Yes.
Yeah.
Aaron, your thoughts? None? Okay. Mark?
So I agree that I'm tired of Zoom, but I think the thing that we should consider is that Zoom does bring about the ability for more participation, whether it's just passive or whether people actually participate. And so in that regard, I would favor a hybrid model. Understanding, of course, that still requires a physical quorum at the meeting. It's just that brings government to more, it gives the potential for seeing government to more people.
Well, I guess I concur with pretty much what all of you said. I've just recently started driving special ed kids on a bus, and I'm actually seeing human beings in the day, and it's really nice. And it's refreshing to be involved with people. So I think the hybrid model is perhaps the best one. But in the absence of a hybrid model, I personally would also probably lean towards getting back to meeting in person instead of the Zoom. So is this something you need a vote on, Matt, or are you just trying to get opinions on this stuff?
Just opinions, and based on what I've heard, our next meeting, which is 2 weeks from tonight, will be in person in the council chambers. And as the hybrid technology may or may not be available, we'll incorporate it as we can.
It sounds great. I think that's reads everybody pretty correctly. So, all right. Well, any other discussion on this? Well, let's move on to this big number 6, which I have to say, I read through this stuff over and over again. I'm still not sure I get it all, but Matt, you'll make it so clear.
I'm not
question
sure
is,
that
how
I'm
much do
gonna,
we lose control of and how much do we gain control?
I'm not sure that I'm going to make it really clear. Matt Fleming has cleared up some of this for me. And I'll just start by the beginning of where I got lost and confused on this is when the bill was passed, it looked specifically, or it talks specifically about impact fees. And I'd always been taught that there are two ways park fees are assessed, and that's some communities choose to do so via ordinance, some choose to do so via impact fee. And I always knew that ours were via ordinance. So when I saw language in this bill about impact fee, I wasn't necessarily tuned into that it was going to impact us the same way that communities that assess impact fees. What Matt Fleming's explained to me is that there really is little difference in the law between a fee charged via ordinance and an impact fee. And so that's why there was some confusion on my part, and why this is now in front of us for a larger discussion and look. And Matt can go into a lot greater detail with a lot more knowledge on this than I can, but I kind of wanted to explain a little bit.
Maybe if others are like me, maybe you can describe a little bit what an impact fee is, or an ordinance that requires a fee.
Well, I think probably for the committee's benefit, I think it's probably best for you to just start with a clean slate and forget about, some people distinguishing between impact fees and those adopted by ordinances, because it's really sort of a false distinction. I mean, I think at one time even though the terminology is probably not the best, it might have had some validity, but basically an impact fee is, well, I think I've got the statute in front of me. It is actually statutorily defined as cash contributions of land or interest in land or any other items of value that are imposed on a developer by a municipality under this section. Now, it says under this section, but then later on it talks about, you read the whole statute together and it ultimately says, well, this is the only way that you can charge impact fees. So it's basically things you charge developers as a result of development, because the development has created the need for certain public facilities. The classic example of an exaction or impact fee requiring land or money spent or work to be done is just the dedication of public roads and highways, street trees, sidewalks. All of those things are examples of impact fees. Now, some of those things still are sort of taken care of more under the subdivision law, and like streets, for instance, are still directly covered under the subdivision law, because there's not, as tenuous a connection between the need for streets and and what's caused by the development, because it's obvious from the plat. If you want to access the lots created, you need a public street. But for a lot of other things, for instance, you project the need for a new, fire station, or new police station, those kinds of things. Water towers, all that kind of stuff can be things that you want to charge developers for, that would be an impact fee. Now, parkland dedication and in particular fees in lieu used to be exempt from impact fees. More appropriately, it was just handled strictly under Chapter 236, and it was effectively considered an exemption. Now we can still simply demand parkland from a plat, for instance, without enacting an impact fee. That's still allowed under Chapter 236. But if we are going to take fees in lieu or do park improvement fees, as opposed to taking the land or making the developer actually improve a park in the development, we need to do it by an impact fee ordinance. And what that requires, it is enacted similar to the way at least initially our fees were developed. You do sort of a study of what the needs are. Usually in this context, it's estimates of how much parkland you really need for X number of dwelling units and that kind of stuff. And you project what your needs are and what the costs are going to be to meet those needs, and you adopt an ordinance based upon that needs study, and that's how you set your fee. The thing with impact fees is under the statute, there's also these additional rules, though, that go along. Some of them you could say are sort of species of even constitutional rules. Generally fees that you impose on development, even more broadly known as exactions, need to bear a rational relationship to the impact of the development. And so there are a variety of statutory things that to a varying degree sort of reminiscent of those kind of rules, but spell them out more specifically in statute. So for instance, the first condition is that it has to bear a rational relationship for the need for new facilities. It can include amounts for increase in service capacity greater than necessary to serve the development for which the fee is imposed. There's a proportionate share requirement compared to the existing uses of land, based on actual capital costs or reasonable estimates. If you have fees that you collect for the same thing, like you do a special assessment or some other fee collection that collects for the same thing for which you're doing the impact fee that needs to be offset, it has to be reduced to compensate for monies received from the federal or state government specifically to pay for specific facilities. May not include amounts necessary to address existing deficiencies, or expenses for operation or maintenance of a public facility. And those two are kind of the big ones, because oftentimes, and one of the things Matt and I talked about are, we've got a few larger parks that are sort of community-wide parks, but there may be improvements that, yes, it's an existing park, but these are improvements that are necessitated by the growth of the city. And, under those circumstances, I think even though it's an improvement of an existing park, I think fees from a new development could be used to pay for that. But, if it's just, hey, our old shelter's kind of falling apart, we're going to put up the same thing, that's probably an existing deficiency for which that needs to be paid out of the general fund or some other funding source, not from impact fees from developers.
So does that mean, for example, if say a development's going in and they don't want to donate any land, they're going to pay one of these fees, that because we can't build a park on that development, that money just sits there and we really can't use it, and in 8 years it goes back to them?
Well, you can use it. Just because you don't put the park in that development
You have to argue that it's related somehow, correlated.
Right, yeah, I mean, so you would sit back and look and you say, okay, here's how much parkland we've got. This is where we expect to grow, and based on this, we're going to expect to need X acres of parkland. Now, this does become tricky when you're going to take fees rather than simply dedicate parkland, because there's a few different things going on. And actually, one of the things I think we're going to want to revisit when I do our municipal attorneys conference again is how exactly municipalities are dealing with this. Because, so for instance, you've got a few different dynamics that are maybe different than other kinds of public facilities, particularly when you're talking about land acquisitions. First of all, the right land to acquire doesn't necessarily, reveal itself, whenever you want it. It's not like, okay, we're going to decide, we have the land, we're going to decide to build a playground. Well, you can kind of decide to do that whenever the timing is right for you. But acquisition of land is a little bit different. And the planning and the ability to time that in relationship to your collection of fees is a little bit more difficult. Then, of course, at the same time, you might be approving plats, for instance, where, for some of that new growth, you are maybe actually getting land. So it's almost sort of a moving target, I think, that you look at, and you projected this much growth, but rather than just fees, you've also projected that, or taken care of some of that new projection with additional land. So I will be interested to hear a little bit more from some other municipalities and how they've shifted that way to. I think some initially, when this first came out, a lot of the talk from the municipal attorneys was, well, we're just going to get land all the time.
Yeah.
Now there are, and that may be a solution, but there are obvious downsides to that, particularly if you're dealing with small CSMs and things like that. I don't know if there's been any turnaround in the thinking about pocket parks, but it has been conventional wisdom for a while that little pocket parks are difficult and expensive to maintain, and you're better off trying to get more kind of regional or larger, land acquisitions.
This committee's been struggling with that, I think, over the last year or two, that there's no land anywhere. And developers would rather pay money, and they don't want to give up the land, and we have no place to go buy land. We're trying to get a park out west of the Beltline where there's a lot of apartments, all industrial area, and there's just no land. Right. And so to me, I personally would like to see a motion where you say, look, you want to put up a development, you give us your half acre or something, or quarter acre there, and that's where the park's going to be. But we're not there yet. But historically, that's not been where most developers seem to want to go.
Well, no, they would much rather pay fees. But this is kind of one of those things where I think falls under sort of be careful what you wish for. I think this sounded like a really good idea to developers, and particularly some that I conversed with, unfortunately, well after this ball had been rolling for some time. But I think certainly the easiest response with regard to the land, and I suppose to some degree the improvements too, is to know, listen, we're just going to demand the land and demand that the developer do the improvements that we expect in that park. And that way it becomes very easy to connect, the new development to the need. And you don't have to keep track of repay, potentially having to repay money after 8 years. But again, that does potentially lead to maybe a park system that's maybe less desirable than what you're really looking for. So,
but it's interesting. I sit on a plan commission, and this has become an issue there too, that there's no land available for future growth. We've pretty much locked up. So this idea of go up, 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 not out, 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 out. And so it's going to be an interesting conversation to bring to that group too. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to chime in on a couple of things. The first being the idea of pocket parks, and I think there was a philosophy or a doctrine prior to my arrival in Middleton that we were trying to avoid that, and we're looking at larger park sites. And I think we've run into this issue on west of the Beltline where we've got to find a way to get a playground. But I want to caution a bunch of half-acre postage stamp size parks, that the community is going to want more than that. And if we get a plethora of these small little parks, people are going to be really disappointed in what their neighborhood park is, as opposed to having an area that not only has a playground, but has open green space, has some other amenities that make it, that neighborhood meeting point. Granted, a playground can do that, but I think when I talk to people, they want to see a lot more than just a playground in their park. And I think everyone here understands that. We need to be careful of that moving forward, that there are some areas where it makes sense, but there are other areas where we want to build better parks than that. And then my second comment, and I think what is the most critical outcome of this discussion, is we've been band-aiding the park system by use of fees that were collected prior to this change to maintain our park system. And moving forward, we're not going to be able to do that. So when we're talking about a tennis court resurfacing, when we're talking about playground replacements, a park shelter replacement, the Parisi Park Shelter, in my eyes, is on hold. We don't have a signed contract. We don't have a funding source. Now, I don't want to speak for Matt, but in my conversations with him, and he alluded to this, that if we're doing something bigger and better, there's a portion of that project that a justification could be made to use these fees. But at Parisi, you're not going to be able to solely fund that from the Park Development Fund. And I believe, Matt, the same is true with our pending project at Firefighters with the ADA and stormwater, although I'm not sure we came to a final resolution on that one. But these are the two, critical top of mind concerns for PRFC moving forward, in addition to just this large discussion on how we fund. We've got a significant investment. One of the things the finance department is tasking all department heads with right now is trying to come up with a value of all of our assets. And so when you look at the overall park system, and for me, it's a really good exercise, because we've done this for playgrounds, but we haven't done it for everything else. Mm-hmm. And so what is the life cycle of that amenity? When does it need to be replaced? And then looking at what we should annually be putting into park maintenance, and knowing that it can't come from these park fees, but it has to come either from general fund or some other magic pot of money that that we currently don't have available to us. Mm-hmm. How are we going to address that moving forward, knowing how tight the general fund is, and then prioritizing what's most important? So this is a big issue for me moving forward. And we've spent a lot of time the last 5 years trying to make sure that the things we have are in good shape, and reinvesting in our existing amenities. And we're going to have to be creative in how that moves forward.
I'm just curious, Matthew, whether, give any insight, what was the original driver for these laws to be passed and changed? Maybe we don't want to go down that road.
Yeah.
Okay, enough said. You answered my question.
Developers want amenities, they just don't want to pay for them.
Yeah.
Well, and there are certain,
if they pay, they want to make sure they get the benefit.
There are certain developers who didn't like how certain things went, and I mean, unfortunately, that's how a lot of municipal legislation has gone the last 5-10 years. Is somebody raises a stink and it's all about one thing, and that's kind of what you focus on, but then all of a sudden it causes bigger problems and then bigger issues, and that's, like I said, one of the things that has happened here.
All right, well, let's open the floor for comments, discussion.
I have a question for Matthew. Is there supposed to be any link between the development and the park that the funds go to? In other words, do we have to demonstrate that the development that we're extracting funds from, that those funds are going towards a park that benefits those residents would live within the user area of the park in question?
That's a good question. I mean, I certainly think that your overall scheme of collecting fees and everything at some point has to take into account those residents, and you're going to expend those funds. I mean, I would imagine in most cases, you're probably gonna have to show that direct connection, but like I said, I mean, you know, you have improvements or maybe additions to a more regional park, you know, if you have sort of a plan that takes that into account, you know, but even there, I think you're kind of making a connection or making an assumption that you've got, you know, additional residents and they're going to want to use that additional park. So a little bit of thinking out there for you. I don't know if that actually answered your question, but you know, on some level, there's going to have to be a connection, an expectation that it is a benefit to the development that you know, that you got it from. But you know, so for instance, I think it would be more problematic to you know, use fees from one development to go, you know, improve a new pocket park or something, or give that something a little additional, unless you really thought that that was going to be something that was going to be used by, you know, more of the new development.
Right, right. So it's been a while since I looked at our corp. Does that cover our deficiencies and the regions that various parks serve and such?
Well, I'll try and take a stab at that. The park fees we've collected since the law change are really in the Parmenter corridor, the downtown area, Graber Pond. You know, those are the areas where we've collected fees over the last year, and you know, a substantial amount of them are in that Parmenter corridor, where we're going to be hard pressed to identify new parkland to spend that money.
I mean, I guess maybe I try to stretch things a bit, but it's sort of, to me, it's a something versus nothing. That you may enhance a park that's not all that close to the new development, but the lack of the funds mean there's no park anywhere for their developers anyway. So that even if they have to drive a mile to a park, there's still a better park to drive through, which is better than nothing. So I guess maybe the question is who arbitrates this?
Well, I mean, ultimately it's first and foremost going to be sort of a legislative sort of decision. But if somebody disagrees with that outcome, the arbitrator is likely to be a court.
Okay.
Somebody will sue to say that our fee structure is not correct. But like I said, I mean, can I envision, I suppose, some sort of plan where, you know, generally you're planning for a whole bunch of park improvements, but you know, every dollar doesn't necessarily go to a park within this specific development, and it, you know, but I mean, I think you know, if on a broader scale, it serves the needs that respond to more growth, that probably works. But you know, you just got to begin to think about what are the different ways this can be done, and evaluate that as we go. But
so that will be part of our creativity, also looking at, we'll have to deal with those issues when we think about park stuff. Other comments, questions, discussion? Yeah, Jim.
How does this, or would this affect somebody that has a parcel and wants to put a duplex or a 4-unit structure on it? So is that a development? Is that part of what would be included under this?
yes, I mean, yeah, we charge park fees for that, and we should charge park fees.
Right.
I mean, every new dwelling unit has someone living in it, and
Right.
they need park allocation. That's where the real, I think, challenge lies, and where it's going to be important to both sort of try to accurately project the pace of multifamily type of growth, and at the same time be actively looking for available land and trying to acquire available land based upon those projections. I'm not really sure how else to do it.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Take that example. Sorry, there's a case in point here. The property that's near the ice house. If you insist on land as a as fulfillment of park fees or whatever, how is that guy going to come up with land? I mean, he's not going to.
No.
Right. So, I mean, so there are limits as to whether or not we can insist on land versus fees in lieu.
Well, where this is easy, Mark, and what you're getting to is a Bishop's Bay, what the Bruce Company is talking about, the proposed development adjacent to Graver Pond, those are easy because you're going to be collecting fees. There's going to be adjacent parkland that's new, and you're going to have a funding source to develop it. But when we're talking about these infill projects or conversion, you know, from a single family to two duplexes or you know, some of the smaller infill projects we've seen, that's where, you know, we're going to have to really look at what is the park area that serves those residents, and what are improvements that we can do that fit our vision for the park system.
Yeah.
All right. So the other question I had is that the documents I read seems to infer that you need a pre-implementation and post-implementation accounting for all of this. Do you have that, or is it just, or are we still too early?
You're muted, Matt.
I muted myself because my son walked in the room and then I started talking. So sorry about that. He's excited to tell me about how his first night at T-ball went. In terms of the accounting, Bill and I have started to work on that, and I don't think it's going to be an issue. I don't think we have it ready for display right now, but it's something that by the next meeting we can have the, you know, clearly what we've collected both fee in lieu and for improvements. The challenge is going to be, you know, that as we move forward and we talk about a project being funded from park development, I think the commission's going to have to be comfortable with it. We're probably going to want city attorney review just as a sign off to make sure that we are doing the right things moving forward. Nobody here, nobody from a staff perspective, we're not trying to circumvent the law in any way, shape, or form. I want to make sure we're doing things the right way just as much as you guys do.
But the other implication there is that everything from the effective date of the ordinance or of the act needs to be on a LIFO basis, right? Because we don't want to be stuck having to track down a developer to refund fees that we couldn't somehow spend. So, I mean,
Yeah, it's antithetical to government, you know?
yeah, well.
Well, it's especially true when I suspect that I don't know if our fees have really, we've been charging really the full amount that we ought to have been charging this entire time.
Yeah.
And Matt, just so you know, we had talked, and I just sent you an email. In that letter, I said the effective date was April 4, 2017. Well, it's a 2017 act, but it wasn't adopted until 2018. The effective date is April 4, 2018, not 2017.
Okay.
And the accounting Bill and I have been working on is reflective of the 2018 date.
Oh, darn, I thought I found you a whole nother year.
Could you, Matthew, this maybe there's something I read in there about the $70,000 threshold.
Yeah, that is, well,
Is that relevant?
yeah, if it's more than $75,000, the developer can defer payment of the impact fees for a period of 4 years from the date of issuance of the building permit, or 6 months. Yeah,
Okay.
What I can share in response to that, John, is since this law went into effect roughly a little over 3 years ago, we've had no one request deferral or spread out their payments, and most of the projects have all exceeded that financial threshold.
All right.
So let's talk about that from a going forward perspective here. What that suggests, though, is that there could be other conditions about getting the development process moving, right? What I hear is that it is at the developer's option whether to defer or not. Is that correct?
Right, if you meet that threshold.
Right. So, but there's nothing to preclude whatever approval process would say, yeah, you have that right, but we would look more favorably on your permitting processes if you paid those fees up front or at the time of the platting. Is that, there's nothing to preclude that.
Well, no, depending on what you're talking about in permitting processes. I mean, you know, if you have an approval that, you know, if you meet this standard, you're entitled to the approval, you know, but if you're talking about an entirely discretionary sort of thing, yeah, I mean, there's always, you know, depending on the development, some items of discretion that you're, you know, willing to agree or do one thing, and maybe you become more agreeable to allowing that, or even developers wanting to do just something unique, and you become agreeable to doing that where you don't really have to. Yeah, you can get something in exchange, but I would certainly not advise, you know, where it's strictly speaking a permit, that if you meet these standards, you're entitled to the permit. You know, we can't be holding that as leverage to get a developer to do something that he has the choice to do or not.
Other comments, discussion? I mean, clearly this is going to have a big impact on what we do with our parks, and I'm sure it'll be in front of us a lot. And Matt, I trust you'll take care of it all for us. But it certainly changes the dynamic of what we're looking at in the future. So we'll have to, this will come back many times. Did you get the discussion you needed or information you sort of, I mean, I think we're all kind of up to speed on this now.
Yeah, I mean, that was my goal for tonight. And I think staff's gonna have to spend some time formulating a plan for the firefighters project to ensure that can move forward. So.
You know, that seems like one of those big citywide parks. It seems like that one should have a way to go forward.
And the unique thing there is that because of the baseball, softball aspect, kids from every corner of the community utilize that park. Yeah. So I think it's the easiest park to make that justification for. It's just making sure that the attorneys agree with what I'm saying.
Well, you'll do that. I'm sure you will. All right. Well, if hearing no other comments, let's move ahead to item number 7.
And John, again, you've heard this a lot from me with the CXC project, and you'll hear it again on this issue. Matt Fleming's a wonderful resource, and I really appreciate his willingness to join the call tonight.
All right. Thank you very much, Matthew. And you were clear, unlike Matt, you were very clear about what.
You done with me then? I'm happy to stay, but
it's okay.
Okay.
Enjoy your dinner, whatever. Have a drink. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night. All right. So item number 7, splash pad. Part 2.
So I think everyone's aware that we did some work at the splash pad, and as the company that was in doing that work, Commercial Rec Specialists, who we purchased the splash pad and the equipment from, there is a master controller, kind of the computer that runs the whole thing, and they say it's on its last Band-Aid. There's a quote attached for replacement of that. This wasn't something that was included in that initial approval that we discussed last fall, so I wanted to bring this forward. The challenge right now is a funding source, and I know that's not your job, but sometime between now and next week, Bill Burns, the finance director, and I will come up with a recommendation, and
Yeah.
the finance committee may have other thoughts, but I think it's important to move forward, because if this fails, a reinvitalized, very popular splash pad right now would kind of come crawling to its knees.
You need some pocket of pre-2018 money, that's what you
But that's gone.
These are gone. Okay. Well, obviously, we saved a lot of money. We were talking about, 6-digit stuff for that splash pad, and we managed to get those other repairs done fairly well. So this seems relatively minor to me in terms of what we saved. So it's costing more than what we thought, but I guess my opinion is it depends whether you can find the money. Other comments, discussion?
Yeah, this needs to be fixed. Like Matt said, this cannot fail, especially given the summer that we had last year where it wasn't available.
Yeah.
And, given the fact that there's going to be high demand to use it, it needs to be operable.
Hot and dry too.
Mhm.
All right. Other comments? Are you looking for a motion on this, Matt?
Yeah, please.
I'll make the motion to approve the, to award the quote.
Okay. Nick, is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right, Sue's got a second. Obviously contingent upon your ability to find the money, but any discussion of the motion? All right, hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? All right, there you go, Matt.
Thank you.
Final thing, project updates.
I wish I had all good news for you. The pool startup process was again an interesting one. We lost the pool heater. It is beyond repair. The good news in that regard is the water temperature was 76 degrees today, which is great movement from when we first filled the pool and the water was 59 degrees. This could impact, early morning swim lessons, and this is more of an awareness and education, because we're going to be limited in any repair we can make. Rebecca estimated that replacing the heater would probably be a month process. That during that time, the pool probably wouldn't be operational. So as staff, we've made the decision that as soon as the pool closes in the fall, we want to be lining up. We should have the funding source in place with the capital allocation for the aquatic center. But it's going to be on Rebecca and myself to make sure that we're lined up and ready to replace that heater this fall as soon as we can. So
Just curious, what's the cost of that heater?
we estimates in the $40,000 to $45,000 range. One of the unknown factors is how much piping is going to need to be replaced and how that heater gets piped into the overall system of the pool. So,
Well, and we're still looking at this doom and gloom scenario on the whole pool, correct? Like five.
I wouldn't call it doom and gloom. There's movement beyond that. I think the last assessment had us in a pretty good place, provided we do the things that are identified in that plan, like replace the heater, and there's some other things too. So.
No, that's good. I mean, we started out in a dark place with that, and then we got better.
But as the city goes through the strategic planning process, I think the pool needs to be a topic of what is the plan. Are we going to continue to, make repairs and have a fund that's reinvesting in the facility, or is there a point where we're going to look at a replacement or another type of project? So, but that's for another time. The pre-sea shelter design I alluded to previously, in my eyes, that's on hold right now since the funding source has been called into question, and more so from a design process, how we would build it, how we would come up with the funds to construct. So the update there is that's kind of on hiatus in my estimation. And the CXC Erdman Park, things are moving. I know Mike Davis is listening in and he'll appreciate my optimism here, but I think we're really close. The city's reviewed the design for the roadway and has provided comments back. I don't think there's anything that's a substantial issue. They are putting the final things together for their financial requirements as part of the agreement with the city. I think the thing that's holding up right now is stormwater approval, and getting their stormwater permit approved. That'll have to be approved before construction starts. But I think that we're likely to see construction begin this summer on the road and parking lot. And then that, I hate to use puns because I cringe every time some of my colleagues do, but it really paves the way for the bike park improvements to move forward once the road and parking lot are in. So.
Okay. And what about our beginning discussions on the West Side Park?
Blake is prepared to review those sites with you at your next meeting. He's on vacation this week, so it didn't work for tonight, but on the, I think, 21st, so 2 weeks from tonight, that'll be on the agenda, and we'll be looking at kind of what he's found and what options best to move forward with.
Okay, I guess particularly you talked about funding, because at one point you said you had funding to be able to do that. Is that now changed?
No, I think, so the mayor's vision of those pocket parks, and there's even there's a development that got zoning approval last week that's across from the Marriott Hotel that could be another one of these situations where between the site Blake's working on and this site across from the Marriott, there might be a way to serve both of those sites, serve that region of the city very well. So,
well, I would think with Matthews that with all the units out there, this is a need that would fulfill all of those, and I couldn't see there'd be a big problem with looking to get funds out of those developments and things. So anyways.
Yeah, I think I have to make the argument, and maybe somebody will disagree with me, but that those downtown projects that have occurred are very adjacent to those sites.
Yeah. Well, I won't argue. Any other comments, questions?
I was just gonna say,
Yes.
Matt, I know that there's always, the opportunity for fundraising. I'm happy to help with that, whether it be the pool. I know tons of parents in the area that will do whatever they can to make that pool stay open and keep running. So
yeah,
we can always talk offline about that later. I'm happy to help in any way I can, but
So
whatever it be.
fundraising is a huge part of that whole park maintenance discussion moving forward, and other communities have very structured systems in place, but they all rely on staff being involved in that process. And I think there's ways to do that in an ethical, moral way that doesn't concern issues, but I think it's part of a bigger discussion that has to take place at some point.
Yeah, at this committee level or just in general city level?
In general, the city, I'm not sure it can originate at this committee and move forward, but it's kind of been and I understand the reasons. The city's kind of had a hands-off approach to staff being involved in fundraising. I understand the reasons, but looking at what we're looking at the park system and the limitations that we have, I think it's got to be part of a solution moving forward.
Just one last question on the pumps, the new pumps at Tiedemann's. The wall looks good, but there's still plastic wrapped around those things in the street. So I'm just wondering I haven't seen anything going on there for a couple of weeks.
I don't want to be crass, John,
Okay.
but the Public Works Committee meets next Monday. I mean, it's a Public Works project that I knew was happening, and that the trail was going to be closed for a portion of time, but that's what I know about it.
Well, the trail's back. Thank you. Few screws sticking out, but I take my screwdriver with me in the morning. All right,
Okay.
any other comments or questions?
I have some questions. I don't about funding, just general basic questions. Maybe Matt or Mark can help me. I have a problem with understanding where specific funds are coming from. It's like either the general funds. I understand capital funds and what they're doing, but the park fund, the fees in lieu, does that go to the park fund? And the general funds, I'm not, that's just from what's collected through the taxes?
Correct.
Think of it this way. If you think about the operations of the city, the ongoing expenses, right? Just routine people expenses and regular maintenance expenses are coming from where your taxes are collected. Anytime we're doing anything other than that, they're usually coming from one of three sources: either the capital fund, which is essentially a construction fund, is the way that we're using it, or it's coming from those two park user fees funds, the park development fees in lieu or park, or yeah. So we, prior to tonight's conversation, the fees that a developer would pay would either be fees in lieu or park development funds. And that's generally what we've used to do a lot of our capital projects. As an example, the Lakeview shelter redo, that was all done from those two funds. Some of the trail projects that we've done, or some of the other small capital items that we've done. For example, every year we do major maintenance on the pool. That's coming from the city's capital fund. Paying for the staff to go around and to maintain the parks and trails, that's coming from the general fund. I don't know, does that help at all?
Yes, that helps. That explains a lot. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Help me too. All right, anything else? All right, hearing no other comments, no new business, obviously. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move.
I'll move.
Thank you both. You guys can fight over. Sue, I think you had first, and Nick, you were about a third of a second behind. So there's our first and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. We'll see you in person in 2 weeks. So thank you all.
And